Welcome to the Getting Defensive podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Khaled.
This is a whole new thing. Like it's going to be weird getting used to this new name, and like there's another person here. Like we got to behave.
It's so weird. Anyway, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce our guest for today.
Thanks. We got a great guest for today's show. This is Allan Liska, who we've known for many a year. And just to flatter him with his amazing bio, I will read what his PR people sent us verbatim, because otherwise they send us an Instagram. No, I'm kidding. But we've known Allan for many years when we used to go to conferences, and he was one of the people we thought about when we were kind of coming together with this format, because he's got some great insight. But he's got over 20 years experience in the ransomware and information security spaces. He's worked with many different organizations, helping them. When people talk about ransomware, he's usually one of the go-to guys. You'll see him interviewed all the time. You'll see him quoted all the time. I don't know why he's slumming with us, but we appreciate it. Let's see, back to your bio. You've provided ransomware-related counsel and key recommendations to major global corporations and government agencies, sitting on national ransomware task forces and speaking at global conferences. He's worked as both a security practitioner and ethical hacker at Symantec, iSight Partners, FireEye, and Recorded Future, where you are currently, and recently were acquired, which we'll talk about if you want. You've also authored a number of books, including The Practice of Network Security, Building an Intelligence-Led Security Program, Securing NTP, A Quick Start Guide, which I hear is very timely, Ransomware, Defending Against Digital Extortion, DNS Security, Defending the Domain Name System, and Ransomware, Understand, Prevent, Recover. That's a lot. And you do a whole series of comic books.
Yes.
When do you sleep?
So I don't. And what is strange about this new format is I was fully expecting the standard disclaimer about the views, not our views not being the views of the past, present employer. And I just want to go ahead and throw that out there just in case, because sometimes my views aren't the views of our employer.
That's a fair. So I don't have an employer, so I don't have to worry about that.
Right.
Anymore, but just so I'll say it for everybody, just to reiterate: the views we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So there you go.
Well, with that, welcome, Allan. Thank you for coming on our show. And wow, I mean, you've done some amazing work. And anything you want to add to the bio that we might have missed?
No, it's way too much. It's embarrassing. You added the important part is I now write comic books as well. So
do you want to start there? How did you get into that? And tell us about that.
So as you know, I spend a lot of time on a plane. I was joking that this week I'm in Boston and I'm going to hit 100 nights at Hilton, just at Hilton's this week. And I still have, I don't know how many months left in the year. And Jerry, I'm sure you don't miss those days. So obviously I love your podcast. But I also, when I'm on an 8-hour plane ride or a 10-hour plane ride or whatever, I love old-time radio programs like, the old Green Hornet and Superman and Lone Ranger, but especially yours truly, Johnny Dollar. For those who don't know, he's the man with the action-packed expense account, America's fabulous freelance insurance investigator. And I loved him when I was a kid because he got to travel around the world beating up bad guys and filling out expense reports. I didn't know how painful expense reports were back when I was a kid. Now, unfortunately, I'm very painfully familiar. But it turns out there are other people who do incident response who like the Yours Truly Johnny Dollar show. And I was talking to a couple of them last year, and they said, we should turn him into a freelance cyber insurance investigator and, kind of bring him back to a new generation. And I'm like, that's kind of cool. But I don't have the time or the energy to do a podcast. But I could write a comic book, because how hard could that be? Turns out it's really hard. Because
And you've written a lot of books, so you know how hard that process is.
Right. But the
Yeah.
problem with comic books, so it's like writing a comic book is a lot like old Twitter, in that less is more. Like, you can't,
Mm.
everything that you want to write, you can't write. So it's, how do you get it concise? And then how do you find an artist that matches the style? Because I can't draw to save my life. So then finding an artist. And then it turns out you have to get somebody to letter your comic book, because the artists don't do the lettering. And some artists don't even do like the colors. Like, some will do the
Wow.
sketches and the inks, and then you need somebody to color that in. And then you need somebody who does covers, because you need to have a cover for your comic book. And then you need somebody who can design the whole comic book, take all the art and everything and put it together. And then you have to send it to a printer, and all that stuff it's really complex, but it's a fun world. For now, it's a fun world to be in. So we did the first Kickstarter last year for this, and I'm sure most people know, but Kickstarter is like a fundraising platform.
Mhm.
So I have an amazing wife, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to take $5,000 out of our savings, and I'm going to make a comic book, and then I'm going to do a Kickstarter, and maybe we'll get some of the money back." And she didn't immediately divorce me, and so she let me follow through, because I was just so passionate about it. And admittedly, I've spent $5,000 on way dumber things in my life. Um, and then we did the first Kickstarter, and like, the response was incredible. I wasn't sure, because the Venn diagram of people who like old time radio and hate ransomware, I thought was going to be three, but it turned out it was a lot more than that. And then everybody wanted a second book and a third book, and we just did the fourth book. And actually
Wow.
now we put all four books together in what's called a trade publication, and added a Christmas special, because like the old Johnny Dollar show, they every year they would have a Christmas special where he had to save an orphanage. So we literally had a Christmas special where he had to save an orphanage from a ransomware attack. Only because John Holquist is amazing, we set the whole thing at Cyber WarCon, and John let us use his likeness and all the Cyber WarCon imagery. And it's like, and that way I could bring in a bunch of stars from the InfoSec community and draw them into the book. And so we just finished that, and the response has been incredible from the cybersecurity community and from the old time radio community, which, again, two communities that generally don't intersect, but it's been really cool. And so we did that. And then I was like, I also want to write about disinformation, because I really, that's something
Mm.
I'm really fascinated about. And there was an old comic book character that fell in the public domain called the Press Guardian. And he basically was defender of the free press and puncher of Nazis back in 1940. Only, and a little bit of history for you, in 1940, we still weren't sure which side of World War II we were going to be on. So he wasn't allowed to call them Nazis. So he would refer to the people he was punching as the German American Bund, which was a real group
Interesting.
of German
Yeah.
Americans who it turned out actually were a Nazi front. Um, and but now I get to take that, and I got made his granddaughter, who is fighting disinformation and annoyed that she still has to punch Nazis. So it's been really cool, and you can tell that because I think I just droned on about 5 minutes with nonstop. And when you ask me anything about ransomware, you'll get monosyllabic responses.
No, it's great. Jerry, I know you've got questions too. I don't mean to monopolize the floor, but that's really interesting. I didn't know about the second one, and I'll have to look that up. So before we get off that topic, or more too, but how would somebody find these if they wanted to get them and read them?
So our company is Green Archer Comics.
Mhm.
Greenarcher.io is the URL until I don't know if you all saw the news story about
Yeah,
the .io CTCTLD possibly going away, which is
oops.
fascinating to me. Um, but it's greenarcher.io for now. And yeah, you can go check them out there. We will, once we get the trade publication done, we will throw that up on Amazon as well. But we can't make
Nice.
money selling individual comic books on Amazon, but the big trade publication we can.
Very cool.
Nice,
Thank you.
nice. I'm very interested in how you ended up with ransomware as your kind of specialty.
Because I was working at FireEye at the time, so this is 12 years ago. And as you guys know, 12 years ago, ransomware was Locky, Cerber, it was single machine stuff.
Hmm.
FireEye, through its Mandiant arm, had just released the APT1 report. So we were going around and telling everybody about nation state, nation state, nation state stuff. I was working enterprise. So I was a sales engineer helping enterprise level customers. So that's in FireEye speak, that was mid-size. And they didn't care about nation state stuff. They cared about ransomware because they were dealing with like 5, 6, 7 incidents a week. It wasn't anything bad. It was a nuisance, but they'd still have to wipe the machine, restore it, and go back. And it was always somebody in sales or accounting or whatever. So it wasn't like a critical machine, but it was still annoying. And so I went to our detection team and I said, hey, we have to do something about this ransomware problem. And they said, no, we don't deal with nuisance malware. We don't care about that. And I'm like, oh, all right. But a bunch of the Mandiant guys were having the same problem I was. They were going on site and dealing with all these, again, ransomware attacks. Well, obviously, when Mandiant spoke, everybody had to listen. So I got invited to join the Tiger team where we would build the detections for these ransomware nuisances and load them up into the FireEye platform. So I got to learn a lot about how the detection process worked and so on. And again, because Mandiant wanted it, all those detections wound up in there. And
Ah,
then you all remember Tim Gallo. He was having the exact same problem I was at Symantec, where they had uncovered Stuxnet and they were going around telling everybody about how they had uncovered Stuxnet. And all of his customers were going, great, but I'm not a nuclear power plant in Iran. I really need help with ransomware. And so he and I were like, hey, we should write a book about this. And we went to a bunch of different publishers and they all said, we're not going to write a book about a single type of single type of malware. Nobody does that. Finally, O'Reilly
hmm.
took a chance on us, which I think that's the first time we met was at the O'Reilly conference way, way, way
Hmm.
long ago because I still have the challenge coin you gave me from there. And so he and
Very
I
cool.
co-wrote the book, the first ransomware book. And when I kind of finally had enough of being a sales engineer at FireEye and I wanted to look for a new place, I came over to Recorded Future. And in fact, one of the reasons they hired is the CEO, Christopher, still the CEO, really was concerned about ransomware. And he wanted to be able to say he hired the guy who wrote the book on ransomware. And
Nice.
for the first couple of times we were in meetings together and I said that, I made the mistake of correcting him and saying, no, no, co-wrote the book on ransomware. And he's like, you wrote the book on ransomware. I'm like, okay, all right, you're paying my paycheck. I will say whatever you want. And so, so he specifically wanted me on as because he wanted a ransomware expert as we were trying to ramp up how we can help our clients improve their, ransomware defenses.
Hmm, hmm. So you
Interesting.
mentioned early on that it was just treated as a nuisance, like a one bit of malware problem in an ocean of malware problems. What do you think changed it to be such a primary focus for so many people now?
Sam. I mean, back in 2016 with Presbyterian Health, uh, Sam showed uh, the rest of the malware community that if you infect 100 machines instead of a $500 ransom or maybe $1,000 ransom, you can get a $17,000 ransom, which was unheard of at the time.
Right.
And that's the model that everybody copied after that, and
Wow.
everybody assumed. It was funny because when Sam first came around, everybody assumed they were Russian. And so when it turned out, when they got called out in the indictment as being Iranian, we're all like, wait, what? They have ransomware in Iran now? Um, uh, and but obviously they still continue to have ransomware in Iran and China and Turkey and Russia, of course, but also Brazil and so on. And it's kind of spread out from there.
Wow. Very cool.
Wow. So as you look forward, when I think about where we've been with ransomware, it started off is purely a destructive, you know, element. It was intended to erase your systems, and you had to hope and pray that if you paid the ransom, you would get decryption keys, which you often didn't. But that soon evolved into ransomware actors additionally stealing a copy and threatening or sometimes actually dumping that data online. And I think that's, at least as far as I can tell, made their kind of re-energized their tactics and the likelihood of them getting paid. I'm curious, do you see that continuing to be effective? And do you see on the horizon additional shifts in tactics like that?
I think so. So yes, Microsoft just released a report saying that they saw a 300% decrease in the number of encryption events on ransomware. I don't know that I've quite seen that, but I do know about 30% of the ransomware cases that I deal with right now are data theft only, no encryptions involved at all.
Mm,
And
Wow.
that's up significantly from just from 1 or 2 years ago when it was only about 10%. So I think data has sort of become the new king, in part because it doesn't matter where the bad guys get the data from, right? If your name is on the data and you are the biggest target in there, then your name gets to go on the extortion site. That's we talk. I talk a lot when I speak to people about sort of the sort of the security triad of good asset management, good identity management, and good data management. And for too long, data management, data governance hasn't been part of the security team's purview, at least not in many organizations, but it really has to be
Mhm.
now because you have to know not just where your data is and how it's secured and where your data is and how it's secured in the cloud, but also in your partners, in your partners network, in your partners cloud, and so on. And my marketing team hates this analogy, but it's like what the PSAs we had about STDs, right? Of it's not just who you slept with, but who all they slept with. Well, it's now the same thing with your data because it doesn't
mhm.
matter where that data is found by the bad guys, that goes up on the extortion site.
So even if you're handling your data well, but one of your SaaS partners gets popped and they get your data from that breach, you as the initiator owner of that data might be the one who gets the ransom extortion attempt. Is that what you're saying?
Right, exactly. And you're the one that's
Interesting.
going to get the calls
Wow.
from the Wall Street Journal
Right.
and everything else. I mean,
Mhm.
uh, that's well, and for example, we saw that. I know this is going way back to 2019, but Apple had its had a big event, and the day it had a big event, Revil released a bunch of Apple documents that it stolen from one of its suppliers, but it was timed
Mhm.
to put a black eye on Apple. Nobody cared about the vendor. Nobody cared about the small provider. What they cared about was, oh, it's Apple data that's in there.
It's interesting. It's a little off topic. It reminds me a little bit of like Snowflake's current. problems and saying, "Hey, look, we're not necessarily at fault here. It's our poor password hygiene of our customers. So go blame them." But I don't know how well that talk track is resonating because it still comes back to like Snowflake's the one attached to that problem, and they're the ones that are getting kind of the black eye over the issue. And we Jerry and I've talked about this on our main show about nonetheless you want to make it low friction for your customers, but in an instance like that forcing a little bit higher level of password security, maybe forcing MFA or SSO or FIDO might be a good idea because your reputation still gets hit. And so, I mean, a little off topic, but it sounds somewhat similar in that, hey, like you said, you've got to know how your data is being handled by your third parties.
Right. Well, I mean, you all talked about that with Microsoft and CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
Yes, CrowdStrike was at fault, but everybody called it a Microsoft problem, and the technical
Right.
people were like, "Well, no, it's a CrowdStrike problem, but also it is a Microsoft problem because the way they allow people to install their drivers."
You actually do listen. I'm shocked and amazed and pleased.
It's one of the 10 downloads we just
One
we
of
just
the
found him.
we found 10% of our audience right here, Jerry. It's amazing. Sorry, I completely derailed your question, Jerry. Go ahead.
No, it was a good sidetrack. So, one question I have is, in terms of trends with paying the ransom, are you seeing personally, and from an industry perspective, are you seeing a trend away from paying towards paying, and then also what's your perspective on paying?
It's really, really hard to say.
Mm.
We are seeing fewer people pay ransom, but the ransom demands are higher. So when they are paying, they're
Mm.
paying more. Now, part of that is skewed. This year, we've had 3 8-figure ransoms paid, which is more than I have recalled in any single year in the past. So when we talk about average ransom size, and I know I'm going back to sixth grade statistics here, we really need to be talking about the median, not the mean, because those 8-figure ransoms do throw it off. But there was just a report that was released last week by a insurance conglomerate that said that 40% of their customers were paying a ransom, and that is, I have never seen a number that high. So I do think it depends on. It depends on, everybody has a different view because there is no broad reporting requirements for ransomware. So everybody has kind of a different view. And what I see is limited to our client base and the people that talk to me. What the insurance company sees is limited to the people who they insure. And so it's really hard to get numbers, but it appears the general trend is fewer people paying a ransom, but when they do pay, they're paying a higher ransom. And broadly, it appears that the number of attacks have either slowed down or diminished from 2024, compared to 2023, which was an abnormally horrible year. So, this might just be a little bit of a reversion, but we'll see. There's still plenty of time in the year left for the bad guys to get to work.
Do you think the insurance companies are involved because they're paying out on the cyber coverage? Like, I guess the question is, how often do you see an insurance company with a business with cyber insurance having their insurance provider help cover that ransom payment? Is that
None of
common?
the insurance companies I work with will cover ransom payments, but there are
Okay,
plenty that will. So just, I
interesting.
don't have any insight into that just
No,
because I
that's fine.
don't
Yeah.
work with companies that do. Um, I can tell you other people have said that, yeah, there are definitely insurance companies that are all in on paying the ransom because it's cheaper. Like if you do do just cost benefit analysis, sometimes it can be cheaper to pay the ransom than it is to pay for all of the recovery costs. But and I have to emphasize this repeatedly. Just because you pay the ransom and get a decryption key doesn't mean that your recovery cost is just the cost of the ransom. There is still
Right.
so much more technical debt that is uncovered as you're going through that process of recovery. So it may make it a little bit easier, it may make it a little bit faster, but that ransom cost isn't the only cost of recovery.
Yeah, makes sense.
So if we stay on that for a second, what do you typically see as the other costs involved in recovering?
So the big thing is obviously getting all the systems back up and running, but there is a lot of technical debt that you uncover during that process. Some of which, if you had done more kind of tabletop exercises ahead of real tabletop exercises, not just you know pretend walking through things, you would have uncovered earlier, and you could have been slowly putting in. But oftentimes you find out, hey, we have this great backup system, but it turns out restoring is actually really, really slow. So, because when you buy a backup system, you think, okay, I'll have a machine that goes down and I can recover everything in and out, right? You don't think about, okay, but what if it's 2,000 machines that are down that I have to restore from backup? What's that going to cost? Or you don't realize that, hey, we have all of these internet facing systems that we've never put MFA on, that we now have to figure out how to put MFA on and bring them into our identity and access management process. Or we didn't have an identity and access management process, and it turns out the reason they were able to get in is we had 1,000 credentials being sold on Genesis Market or something. And so, now we need to invest in that. And generally, part of that is after a ransomware attack, the wallets open up, at least for a year, for all of those security things you've been asking for. Now, and I apologize, Jerry, I don't mean to hurt your feelings. A lot of that money winds up going into consultants' pockets, instead of into solutions that solve problems. Um, uh, um, but uh, but it does open up, and it does give you a chance to implement those things that you've been wanting to do. And so there is that part of it, the things I've been asking for 5 years, I can finally do, assuming I still have a job after a ransomware attack, which I may not.
Yeah,
So 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 what you're saying is that the IT department and the security department needs to maintain, I guess, what the government would call their shovel ready list of projects for to pull out in the aftermath of a breach, I guess.
Right, because if you don't have a list, then your consultants will have a list, and it may not be the right list.
what I heard is that you should arrange for a small ransomware event every year to make sure you get your budget for the next year. That's what I heard. No,
I don't
is
think
that
it's
bad?
good job security, but I mean, it's not going to work. It's like the old joke that we used to say, that if you installed the Russian language pack on all of the computers and in servers in your network, you'd never get hit with a ransomware attack. Yes, you're on the hook for Duolingo lessons for all of the employees, but that's still probably cheaper than paying a ransom.
And Russian keyboards, I imagine,
Right, and Russian keyboards, exactly.
or at least the stickers that you could put on the
Right.
keys. Uh, I did have a question too, and I know we're kind of like, I feel like we're interrogating you, but this is an amazing conversation. Thank you. Um, for the ransomware events where you're seeing less encryption but more data leakage, or the extortion around data leakage, do you have any feeling or trend on how successful payment is in stopping that, or do you see a lot of folks pay and still that data gets leaked? Like how much honor is it amongst those thieves?
So it depends on what you mean by honor.
Sure.
I have never seen, except for the case of the big healthcare company earlier in the year, but that was a whole kind of like Real Housewives of ransomware drama thing. Um, um,
I want to watch that show. That sounds great.
I've never seen a ransomware actor leak data after somebody paid to
Hmm.
not have the data leaked. Now, the sort of the coin flip to that is, I've also never seen a ransomware actor actually delete the data they promised they would delete. Um,
Ah,
and so when you pay to not have your data leaked, that is literally all you're paying for, is to not have your data leaked. It is still sitting there. and we don't know what is going to happen with it. We don't know what government it's going to be given to. We don't know if eventually they're going to need more money and they're going to come back to you, or try and, like, if there's a bunch of emails and passwords in there, try and sell that or try and use it on another attack. We know they're not deleting the data, but I haven't seen it actually leaked.
Interesting.
So what is the motivation for someone to pay in that instance? Because it, I don't know of any regulatory regimes where that lets you off the hook from anything.
It
You still have to disclose it. So like what is the incentive to pay? So I suppose if the data isn't actually leaked and there's some assurance that it isn't, which I think is in question, then I suppose the actual harm to, for example, if there's, personal information about end customers and their that, that may reduce the amount of harm or eliminate the eventual harm that comes to them. But I think that's a very tenuous assumption.
agreed.
Maybe they've got executive emails that are very compromising.
Well, that's a good point. That's a very good
You
point.
know, we've worked for some CEOs who found themselves in some hot water, Jerry.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, we have. Yes, we have. Uh, so I guess my next question is, what is your advice? Again, the spirit of this podcast is to help people do a better job of defending their environments.
For
So
the
if you
record,
had
that's
a
the
couple,
spirit, not really the outcome, but that's the spirit.
it's the spirit. It's the spirit.
Yeah.
Because I mean, look, we until we're allowed to line up and punch CEOs, things probably aren't going to change much. but
Sorry.
but so in the spirit of people getting their shovel ready list of projects for after they get breached, what do you see as a common things that companies could do better?
So we talk about a ransomware attack as a single event, right? Ransom
Mhm.
Hub hit this victim, or Lockbit hit this victim, etc. You all know, and I think most of the people who are listening know or watching, that a ransomware attack is actually multiple threat actors. You have your initial access broker
Mhm.
who's going to get your access. They're going to turn around and they're going to sell that to the ransomware operator, who is likely working as part of a RAS collective and their affiliate for somebody who manages the RAS operation. So you really have three different threat actors that you're dealing with: the initial access broker, the guy that carries out the attack, and then the RAS operator that you're going to deal with for negotiation and payment. Let's do our best to stop the initial access broker, because if you stop the initial access broker, you've don't have to worry about the rest of the attack. Mostly, there's some exceptions. Clop being a prime example of somebody that does everything in house, but for the most part, for most ransomware attacks, if you can stop that initial access broker. So what does that mean? That means good identity management, because leaked credentials is one very common way to get in. So even something as simple as, are you using Have I Been Pwned, right? There's a free version of that. So even for small and medium-sized companies, you can use Have I Been Pwned to find out whether or not you have any credentials, any employee credentials leaked. And then have a plan for what you're going to do when you get those emails from Troy telling you about it. That's because that's the part that we fall down on a lot, is we have these alerts. And I know alert fatigue is a real thing, man. I'm not saying that it's not, but you still have to have a plan in place. So when those alerts come in that, hey, this employee credential was leaked, what are you going to do? How are you going to get that password changed? How quickly can you do that? The other thing that we look at is uh, exploitation, especially SSL VPNs. As soon as an SSL VPN vulnerability is announced, within 24 hours, we see scanning for that vulnerability. Within 48 hours, we see exploitation, mostly. So I know, Andrew, your kind of catchphrase is "get thee to the patry," and that's true. But there's going to be 50,000 CVEs released this year.
Right.
Anybody who's not Jerry is not going to be able to keep up with patching all 50,000 vulnerabilities. So let's look at the things that the ransomware actors are using. So I recommend to people, look at CISA's Kev list, right? That's a really useful tool that the government makes available to anybody for free. These are the things that are being exploited in the wild by the bad guys. So you've just taken that 50,000 list of CVEs and you've turned it into 100. Can you patch those 100 quickly? And then know that these are like the things ransomware, these are the three things ransomware actors like to exploit. Can you patch those three things really fast if you have them in your network? And then the other thing, which we're really not going to be able to solve for, as much as I'd love to tell you that there was an easy solution, but phishing. Now, there are some things you can do. IBM has their 8.8.8.8 servers, right? That's IBM, or was that 4.4.4?
That's 9.9.9.9.
9.9.9. Quad 9. And that has passive DNS security built into it, right? So if you don't need to manage your own DNS, use a DNS server that has passive DNS security built into it. It's not going to stop all of your, it's not going to stop all phishing attempts, but it's going to stop a lot of them because phishing still relies largely on DNS. And so you can slow down some of those attacks there. And then, yes, if you're using Gmail or you're using Outlook, which most of us have outsourced our email to one of those two providers, turn on the enhanced security features in those emails to help keep your employees better protected. Again, not going to solve everything, but those three kind of basic things will keep out a lot of the initial access brokers. And it doesn't require like whiz-bang AI-enabled zero trust doohickeys to do all of that. It covers you for a lot of the basics without having to be too fancy, without having to have a security team in place. And so you can do that. Now, if you do have a security team in place, use your EDR, make sure that you are giving care and feeding to your EDR. EDR solutions are not set it and forget it as much as the vendors might tell you they are, but use those and use those to look for things that ransomware actors like to use, and then again act on those alerts. And when you have a third-party tool that kills your EDR, have that set off like all the alarms in your SOC and be the immediate thing that you respond to, because nothing should be doing that. That's a bad guy sitting on your network, right? So
Trend Micro just released some research on that, I think this week. I was just reading that earlier before I got Trend Micro found a EDR silencer tool that will go basically block the EDR's ability to phone home back to the centralized console. It's
yeah,
kind of rude. Sorry, I completely interrupted your flow. I'm sorry. Go back to
no, but that's exactly, those are the kind of things that you should be looking for. If anything that disrupts your EDR should generate an alert somehow. If that EDR hasn't called in for 5 minutes, let's go ahead and check that out. Whatever that threshold is. But if we can get the basics done, that stops a lot of it. It's not going to stop everything. There's going to be things you miss, but at least if we can do those kind of basics, then I think that goes a long way to keeping people safe.
I think it's great. On the password side, how much do you think like a company being pretty good about perimeter MFA or SSO helps versus static passwords?
I think MFA is more important than password changing. In fact, I think NIST no longer advises password changing.
Yeah.
And so I do think MFA helps. The only thing I'll say is obviously with a lot of the info stealers that are out there, they do steal the MFA logs so that they have the tokens, which can be bad. But maybe on a perimeter device, don't give yourself 30 days without having to without having to re-up the MFA. If you make that token much shorter for perimeter devices, then you don't have to worry as much about the about somebody stealing the identity along with the token. And I know it's more annoying for employees. You may get more complaints. show them how much a ransomware recovery would cost. And
Right.
you know, uh, there's certain battles you can win. I think that is a battle you can win. Like, I would love it if I could convince everybody in the world not to give everybody in their network local admin access. But I don't feel like I'm ever going to win that fight. But I think I can win the battle for perimeter devices, MFA with very short token times.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So when I was way back when I was in the business, so, 3 months ago, uh, one of the trends I was seeing with a lot of our suppliers and some customers that were getting hit with ransomware, it felt like it was almost cookie cutter, right? Even though it was different ransomware actors, it was like the same. You could almost predict exactly what happened, what had happened, and to a T, every single one of them had had either a Cisco or a different brand of firewall at their perimeter that had expired maintenance,
Mm.
and like every single one of them. And it is that something that you see a lot? It was very eye opening to me how many, especially small businesses, don't keep current maintenance on their equipment.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that is Cisco, Fortinet. Um, there are one or two others that I see pretty frequently that I'm like, hey, that's expired. But that goes back to that asset management. Like, hey, did you renew the license
Hmm.
on all the things on your perimeter? Um, I get it, man. You're spending a lot of money on licenses and things like that, but you need to keep your perimeter up to date, right? So at home, I use a watch guard. I don't trust the equipment that the ISP gave me. And, every year I'm paying I'm paying the $1,000 license fee to renew that. Now I'm in a position that I can do that. I haven't convinced my company to let me expense it yet, but I'm in a position I can do that, and I think it's worth it because I want, you know, on our edge, which I consider the device right before the, off the shelf, never updated wireless router slash cable connector that our ISP gives us. I consider that part of the cloud now. So I want to keep us as safe as possible, but I think it's important to do that and keep our home as safe as possible.
Nice.
Interesting.
So, got about 15 minutes. I want to be very respectful of your time. Um, Anything like really critical on ransomware that we haven't asked you about that's worth making sure people know about before maybe we drift to another topic?
So I do think that if you can do it, and this is getting beyond sort of the easy stuff, and Jerry, I think, made this point that a lot of ransomware attacks are cookie cutter because they share scripts with each other. They jump
Mm.
from one ransomware to another. I mean, that's the beauty of the affiliate program is I can deploy this ransomware or whatever. Every ransomware attack I've ever seen uses PowerShell. Um, and I know asking people to log PowerShell and enable Sysmon is a lot when you're already overwhelmed with logs and when you're already probably spending 25 or 30% of your security budget on Splunk, and I just want to dump a whole bunch of other logs on you. But threat hunting through PowerShell logs can be a great way to spot not just ransomware actors, but nation states and so on, because you can do things like logging PowerShell is a great way to look for anomalous PowerShell. Like, hey, this is a script that's never run before. I should go check that out, right? Or this script is running at odd times, or it's doing things that it shouldn't be doing, right? But again, it requires I need to have a baseline of what is normal, and hopefully, I've built that baseline before any threat actors are in my network, and then um, and then finding the abnormal, whatever abnormal is for your network, becomes a lot easier. But again, I know I've just added, another $50,000 to your Splunk bill, and hopefully Splunk's not a sponsor. I'm sorry if they are. Um, and made more work for your already overworked security team. But if you can do it, I do think that that's a great way to spot a lot of unusual activity when everything else gets missed.
One thing that I meant to ask earlier, then it's interesting. PowerShell is what reminded me of it. Is do you see any real ransomware activity outside of Windows, Linux, Mac OS, anything else really getting hit these days?
Mac OS, no. Linux, yes, but Linux
Hmm.
always from inside the network. And
Interesting.
ESXi, whenever there's an ESXi vulnerability, that's exploited widely and ransomware actors deploy there. Linux
Yeah.
itself, it tends to be from inside the network. So we were all afraid with Log4j, and I think you guys even talked about this on your on the podcast many years ago, that Log4j was going to lead to just all kinds of ransomware. Instead, it led to all kinds of crypto miners. Um, but occasionally we do see ransomware actors exploiting Log4j once they're inside the network to deploy ransomware. So it usually is coming from within the house. Since we're near Halloween time, at the time of recording, at least we can make a Halloween joke.
The youngins may
ESXi
not
on.
get that reference.
I'm sorry.
The youngins may not get that reference,
No,
but
that's fair. That's fair. Right. Yeah. Because they don't have in-house phones anymore, or
right.
home lines anymore.
If you're
Uh,
curious, go Google "when a stranger calls," and you'll see what passed for horror when we were young.
right. Um, and so, but ESXi definitely gets hit. Mac,
Yeah.
no. And it's not that Macs aren't susceptible. It's not that Mac users are suddenly more brilliant. It's just they haven't figured out a good delivery mechanism. The best way that we see Mac ransomware delivered is through unauthorized downloads. So pretending to be this Adobe Acrobat for Mac, or whatever. That's
Yeah.
where we see it, but it tends to still be one machine, and it's just not that widely deployed. I think Mac users are so used to going to even on their laptops, going to the app store to buy whatever apps they want, and they just assume they have to pay for everything. So they don't. So it doesn't happen as often. It still does happen, just rare.
Yeah, and I usually assume, and I don't know if this is accurate, so please correct me, but in general, for Mac in the enterprise, there isn't as much of a tightly coupled trust relationship like with Active Directory as you see in a Windows shop. And I'm not necessarily picking on Active Directory, but we know badly configured Active Directory can be a wonderful lateral movement tool. And that equivalency just doesn't seem to exist so much in the Mac world, or at least not widely deployed.
All right. So if any ransomware actors are listening, please turn this off before I say what I'm going to say. My biggest fear is that no, turn it off. Off. All right. Um, my biggest fear is that someday a ransomware actor is going to figure out how badly built Jamf or one of the other Mac deployment tools are. And then
Sure.
we're going to see a spate of Mac based ransomware using
Yeah.
those kind of delivery tools. Because you're right, there isn't a native version of that in Windows. But I also think that the tools that are available haven't been as well tested
Yeah.
as Active Directory and some of the other Microsoft tools, and they certainly don't have as good security guidance. Whether or not you can actually implement everything Microsoft suggests for their Active Directory security guidance is one thing, but at least it's out there.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And uh, I think there's a lack of attack opportunities that not that Mac is just that much safer. Honestly,
Uh,
I think there's a bit of a false sense of security, and I shouldn't be pontificating. Yeah, that's what you're here for. I don't want to steal your spotlight, but I agree.
I agree
Um,
100%. Yeah.
so,
So
complete topic change. Just on the personal front, just to personalize this conversation a little bit. What else is really interesting to you that you like to do outside of comic books and ransomware, and where else does your passions lie?
I don't have a lot of free time right now. This is
Yeah,
the bad time of year for me, so I live in hotel rooms. So when I talked about dumb purchases that I've made before, several years ago, uh, again, my amazing, wonderful wife let me spend way, way, way too much money on a Leica camera to
Ah.
bring with me, because you all know how it is when you travel. You get off the
Mhm.
plane, you go to the hotel, maybe you go out and get dinner, maybe you order room service. Then you go to some great conference room, spend that day there, go back to your hotel, maybe go to like a nice dinner with the customer or with the vendor or whatever you're with, go back to your hotel, work, 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 get up in the morning, fly off on a plane, right? That's my
Yeah.
life. And I was so tired of that that I bought the camera because it forces me to go out and see the actual city that I'm in. And so that is one of the things that I've made a point to do whenever I get to a new city. Um, I spend that first evening or second evening, depending on how late it is when I get in, kind of walking around the city, taking pictures, and finding out how terrible a photographer I am. But if you take 100 pictures, one of them actually turns out pretty nice, and that's the one that I upload to my photo site. I'm too old and too
Nice.
ugly for Instagram. I just built a real actual photo site instead. And so I love doing that. I'm a big reader. So I usually have one one fantasy book and one workbook, which, I mean, there's so many because we
Mhm.
deal in
Mhm.
intelligence. And so some of the workbooks are like, okay, what was Russia like in 1850? And what can we learn about that from today? Or what's China been doing? And, some of it are, and then just any kind of post-apocalyptic fantasy set in a space station is my kind of jam. And I know that's really specific, but you'd be
Nice.
surprised at the number of books that are out there about that. Um, because none of them ever involve ransomware. So I'm very, very happy just to like, oh, hey, it's just people killing each other and being terrible to each other. That's fine, as long as they're not deploying ransomware with each other. So, and then of course, you all know that I'm a big wine drinker,
Mhm.
uh, uh, so we live in Virginia, which has a burgeoning wine region. Which, I mean, it's 40 years old now. So when I am home, my wife and I just love to go out and pick a winery and just kind of spend an afternoon there, drinking wine, eating cheese, and just getting away from the world. I've learned over the years that I never, ever, ever want to own a winery, because you know the if you think trying to get security budget is bad, trying to negotiate with Mother Nature to have a good season for your wine is really, really bad. And so I just want to let the other people suffer and enjoy the fruits of their labor.
That's amazing.
Interesting. On a somewhat tangential but related note, I have had, and maybe it's a COVID thing. I don't know. I have seen a lot of people, and personally, I had several employees leave IT and security in particular to go be a farmer. So it's been a very interesting change. So I share that same concern because it's completely outside of your control, and you get a freeze at the wrong time. Like everything you've done is for naught. But yeah, more power to him. Glad somebody's able to do it.
It reminds me of the end of Office Space, where one of the guys quits and just goes and does construction,
Yeah.
and he's happy.
Exactly.
Going and doing construction is fine. Having, my grandparents owned a farm, and so I spent my summers working on a farm. I think anybody who leaves this job to go be a farmer probably doesn't know what they're getting into. I wouldn't mind having a farm. I do not want to be a farmer, man, because
Yeah.
there's way too many things that are outside of your control. And as great as you think it feels, On the other hand, we're used to long hours and people ignoring us and so on. So maybe it is a good fit. But it always feels like the people that think they want to quit cybersecurity and be a farmer have only ever gone to farmers markets, and that's a very
Right.
different thing.
I watched the first 3 seasons of the Clarkson's Farm, which if you haven't watched it, I think is amazing.
I
Uh,
love
but
Clarkson's Farm.
so revealing about how tough that life is,
Yep.
and just all the power and respect to those guys. I know it's and girls. I know it's way off topic, but wow! I mean, we think we work hard. We sit in air conditioning all day, and they're hard workers for razor thin margins, and
Right.
it's crazy to
Mhm.
me. But
And he has Top Gear money. Most of us don't have
right,
Top Gear money. And to see the struggles that he's having to turn a profit, even with Top Gear money, is fascinating. And I think he's done a great job of bringing the reality of that. I have friends who own farms, and
yeah,
farmers markets are their lifeline, because if they had to grow and sell mass crops, they would barely ever make a profit, or it would be pennies on the dollar. It wouldn't be enough to reinvest. Fortunately, there's enough dummies that go to the farmers market, including us, that pay more for their vegetables than you can get if you try and sell them in bulk.
yeah. My wife loves a good farmers market, so I'll tell her that she's supporting the local economy and carry on.
Absolutely. I'm there every weekend. I'm home. I'm there with my wife. So we go from March, when the first one opens, all the way up until October, when the last one closes.
That's great. This has been amazing. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you
Couple of
all.
wrap up questions. Yeah, go ahead.
No,
Sorry,
I was
I was
just
just
going to
going to
thank
say.
you sorry. I was just going to thank you. I mean, obviously, I've been a really long time listener. I love your show, and I'm so excited to see where you all are heading. And happy to take any other wrap up questions.
No, that's super
I
kind. Thank you.
I still have my signed copy of your DNS book on my shelf. I should have gotten it out, but it's been amazing to see you again. I'm really glad that you agreed to spend some time with us
Yeah.
and help our listeners out. So thank you very much.
So, any closing thoughts, and where can people find out more about your work, and where would you like them to find you on the social medias?
So you can still find me on Twitter at Allen. I'm sorry, Jerry. I tried Mastodon. I really did, and I can't. I'm also on Blue Sky at just
Nice.
ransomwaresommelier.com on Blue Sky. Uh, uh, Twitter is increasingly awful, but I still get the most cybersecurity information from there. I don't know how much longer, but for now, it still provides a great deal of information. And that's really it. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will probably accept your connection. But literally, I just post recorded future propaganda on
Hmm.
on LinkedIn. Soon to be Mastercard propaganda, but it's all whatever marketing tells me to post there, I post.
Fair. What about all your books? Where's
Uh,
the best place to find those?
all of the books are on Amazon, so you can just search for Allan Liska on Amazon and find them there, except for the comic books, which, like I said, that's on greenarcher.io. And I will send you both signed copies, so you'll have
Yes.
more signed things to display.
That's why we do the show.
To get free stuff. I don't blame you.
I, I mean, I didn't
That's
want to
right.
admit it this early in our run, but it was actually the main purpose. Is actually we're done after this. This was the whole purpose of this entire setup was to get a signed copy of your comic book, and then we're closing shop. This was a CIA front just for this goal, and I think
It
it's been
worked out way
successful.
better.
I always fall for the honeypots.
Thank you, Alan. Anything to leave our listeners with?
Don't pay the ransom, man. Please stop. Like, I've been talking about ransomware for 12 years. I want to talk about literally anything else. I want to talk about, NTP vulnerabilities. I want to talk about DNS vulnerabilities, just anything but ransomware. So if y'all, I was in a meeting a while back, and Andrew, I think you saw the slide where I was talking to an executive, and he's like, look, I don't want to talk to you because I'm sick of hearing about ransomware. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sick of talking about ransomware. So fix your
All right,
stuff so I don't have to.
so we'll make a deal. The next time we have you back on this show, we won't ask about ransomware. It'll be everything else.
All right, that's
Everything.
wonderful.
All right. Thank you, Allan, again. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope this was useful to you, and we will talk again soon.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.